Good afternoon, technically, everyone, wherever in the world you are. My name is Riva Santo. I am a multimedia artist, and I am the founder and co-creative director of Honey and Smoke. Honey and Smoke is an artist platform and hub that creates space for artists to meditate on the important themes of our time in intentional ways. So we host events like this one that create space for artists to come together and just think together so that we can shift social consciousness. My personal practice started more often filmmaking and lately has been transitioning into movement, sound, and word. And I'm super excited to be hosting this with Daniela today it's been a really, really tough year. And I think that we're going to be able to hopefully strategize and reimagine. And I'm going to pass it over to Daniela to kind of explain how things are going to go today.
Fantastic. Hi, everyone. Thank you for being here with us on Saturday. We appreciate both your time and your presence. My name is Daniela Holben. I am a curator, cultural producer, and community builder. I'm mainly focused on artist development, creative hubs, and public programming. I create because I want to build sustainable and thriving artist communities and to facilitate important and relevant conversations. Currently, I work with Arfare and with the Brooklyn-based nonprofit called No Sphere Arts. For those of you that don't know Artfare, we are a curated group of professional working artists and gallery members presented primarily in a digital space. We offer tools tools for artists to connect directly with patrons, promote their practice, and sell their work directly from their studio. And we also facilitate studio visits, educational workshops, curated studio tours, and cultural events. Today, we are coming together in this digital safe space to focus, reflect, and figure out ways to support the artists through this current unrest brought on by COVID and the current political environment. You should have a worksheet that was part of the invitation. If you don't, I have added it in the chat box. We will explore these questions together today alongside our panelists. And the format of the forum today is that there will be 2 rounds. The first round will be focusing on the present moment. So it's going to be reflection and purpose. And the second one will be about the future and visualizing and future visualizing. During each round, you will be able to use the Q&A box at the bottom to engage with the panelists while they're speaking. And then after each round, we will open the floor to some community dialogue for about 10 minutes. This is a time where you can actually ask your questions and make any comments you might have. Just please raise your digital hand and we will give you a voice. There will also be a short 5-minute break in between the rounds. We encourage you to take the time to reflect on the questions and on the first session and to write down any thoughts you might have. We are planning to do this for the next 90 minutes. So hopefully you can stay with us and enjoy this process. And now Riva can introduce our panelists.
Cool. So the first panelist that I would like to introduce, hopefully you can see him right now. Hailing from Washington Heights and the Bronx, Walter Cruz is a creative collaborator exploring the intersections of art, design, and architecture to better understand how Black and brown bodies activate and take up space. Walter is dedicated to learning from and being with the people. Cruz serves as the graphic designer for the Black Alliance for Just Immigration, BAJI, is a part of the creative collective Axel New York City, which creates interactive art installations nationwide, and is the creative director and co-founder for Zeal, a Black worker-owned company that focuses on creating spaces for Black multidisciplinary artists to thrive. He is an MFA candidate at the Maryland Institute College of Arts, Mount Royal School of Art, and earned his BA in architecture from Hobart and William Smith Colleges. In a world that is constantly telling Black and brown folks not to be themselves, Cruz's goal is to create work that inspires and informs those very people. So welcome, Walter. Up next we have Devin B. Johnson. Welcome, Devin. Devin is a Los Angeles native, a multidisciplinary artist living in Brooklyn. He obtained his BA in Fine Arts from the California State University Channel Islands in 2015 and received his MFA in painting at Pratt Institute in 2019. He works primarily in the language of painting. Johnson's work is based on fragmentation and reassembling of sociocultural structures. He often paints from sourced images, urban landscapes, and a lexicon of familiar experiences. He is shown both abroad and in the United States. Johnson is one of 16 artists from around the world selected for the inaugural year of the Black Rock Senegal Residency Program in March 2020. Johnson was recently awarded the honor of being featured in the Northeast and MFA issue of New American Paintings 2019. Also, welcome back to the States, Devin. I know that you kind of got stuck in Senegal for a while.
Thank you. So it's good to be back.
Up next, we have my business partner and best friend, Eileen Itzelmena. Yeah, that's part of her official her bio. Wait, hold on. You can't see her. There she is. Okay. Eileen Itzelmena is an Afro-Dominican multimedia artist, curator, and community organizer from the South Bronx, currently based in Los Angeles. She graduated from the University of Southern California in 2017 with a BFA. Her arts practice synthesizes abstract expressionism, surrealism, and African diaspora spiritual frameworks. She's the co-creative director of Honey and Smoke and helped put this event together alongside myself and Daniela. Her work has been shown in New York, San Francisco, Miami, and London, and has been covered by the New York Times, Cultured Magazine, Mujerista, ArtNet, Hyperallergic, amongst others. She's currently an artist in residence for Zeal's Studio Incubator Program in Inglewood, California. And her upcoming solo show will be taking place virtually on starting August 8th at Layman Space, and you can find more information about this event on her Instagram. And we'll post everyone's social media at the end. And last but not least, we have Athil El Malik. Let's see. Athil, can't see your video, but I'll introduce you in the meantime. Hi. Athil El Malik is an artist, writer, and curator. She is a thinker through aesthetics and an envisioner of new ways and modalities. She's worked at institutions such as Yerba Buena Center for the Arts in San Francisco, the Studio Museum in Harlem, and the Museum of Modern Art in New York. She was the manager of artist Arthur Jaffa's studio and is currently expanding into a development role at Sun House, a film company started by Jaffa, invested in creating Black cinema that reflects the socio-political, economic, and existential particulars of Black being. So as you can see, we have a really esteemed, diverse group of creatives here, and I personally am really looking forward to getting into it with y'all and hearing about how this time has been for you. We're going to be framing this conversation around everything that's going on, but also through the glasses of the sweet season. So if you haven't been familiar with Honey and Smoke before, for 4 months at a time, we focus on a specific theme, and the current theme is sweet. So all of our programming, all of our content has to do with how we can sweeten our relationship to difficult subjects. So we're trying to create a space where we can go a little bit deeper, but still leave feeling, you know, like we've done the work to reimagine in helpful, in more sweet ways. So just to give an introduction and start getting into the voices and visions of these artists. And let's start off, we'll go in order of how I introduced you, but why do you create? And how is your sense of responsibility and purpose shifting right now? So Walter, and please, everybody engage with us in the Q&A until you have your time to chat with us at the end of each round.
I guess in short, I would say lately, or the last few years, I've been creating what I felt was missing when I needed it. you mentioned in my bio, I explore architecture a lot, and I didn't see people who look like us in architecture. So I've just been trying to figure out ways to investigate where Black folks are in that history of the built environment and how to challenge those histories, because I didn't have it when I needed it. So I'm just trying to create what's missing through those avenues that I explored. And I guess in this time, prior to this, I was already trying to figure out how to create space for Black artists. So just pivoting on how do I create space digitally for now for Black artists, just really exploring what that looks like. I'm figuring out ways to fund Black artists as well, since folks are losing gigs left and right, making sure I'm connecting the dots to make sure people are still able to pay their bills when they can. Yeah, those probably been my two main focuses during this time.
It's all you, Devin.
Yeah, so I think for me, it's starting off, reason why I create is something that I think is like this internal urge or something that needs to be satisfied. So it's kind of linked to like whenever you're hungry, you go into the fridge and you get food and prepare yourself some food to eat. I say that my making or my urges to be creative or inhabit this creative life is that insatiable thing that always needs satisfaction. But as I've, I guess, developed into this career path, and I'm starting to understand a little bit more that this career entails, I'm starting to realize where my position is in this whole thing. I've always seen myself as somebody outside looking in. Now I'm inside. So now I have to understand what type of responsibilities is called upon me as somebody who can see these inner workings of a gallery system or art system or this art world, to make it a little bit more transparent or even make it a little bit easier for other people who are on the outside or looking for ways to come in. So I think maybe that separation, that it's not so old, it's very new, that I've just crossed over. So I feel like there's still that way in which I want to reach out to other artists who are young and who want answers or have questions.
Hey, the reason I create has changed a lot throughout my life. At first, it was something that, you know, we're all young, we're all drawing, we're all coloring. So it was something that was like play, exploration, inquiry. But then through experiencing certain traumatic events in my life with my family and people passing away, it became like a healing practice. So I was creating to heal and process. And now including art in my academic practice, it became a form of like more curiosity and learning about the past and like other artists. And these days, I'm kind of like connecting all those dots. And I'm at a point right now where I create to do all of that, heal, express myself, feel, but also I see my creativity as like me working out questions that I have about the world and our interactions. So definitely using it now as like, you know, like I have a hypothesis and like my work is the experiments that I'm doing along to understand certain things and to also create like sustainability models energetically or just like practically for artists or any creative beings. So yeah, that's kind of why I do it.
Theo, you can go ahead.
Okay. First of all, hi, good to be with everyone. And I love seeing all of your art in the background. It's so beautiful. I think similarly to Devin, I also feel like my urge for creating comes from a feeling that I need to and that something wants to come out of me. And sometimes it's like, how do you heed the call and how do you recognize like what limiting beliefs or blocks exist in the way and how to clear them? I think that's kind of been a lot of my work in recent times. And I also feel really invested in creating infrastructure, creating institutional infrastructure that allows and enables a different form of like, how do we arrive at the new world? Because there's so much deep internalization of mostly like capitalism and scarcity around time and scarcity around resources, which, as true as it is, I feel like doesn't necessarily have to be the truth. So yeah, just like what it means to move that from an ideological space into like a, you know, embodied, lived way of relating to each other and of making work. Yeah, and what that looks like for funding people's work, or you know, just how to create spaces where like not, I think in my observation and experience, it feels like 90% of what's hard sometimes about things is like how deeply we have to navigate systems of oppression and white supremacy embedded within like people we have to account to in different ways. And so what happens when you free up that space, that mental space, that spiritual space, just like that space, like everything we can create if we're not busy doing that. So that's kind of what I'm invested in.
I really like what you're saying about space, because something that I think is easy to forget is that in order to reimagine, in order to to envision something new, you have to free up space. Because you can have all of the great ideas about how you want things to look and how you want things to be, but it's not going to come to fruition if there's no space for it. And so I think some of the hard work is figuring out, okay, like what am I willing to let go of? And, you know, you framed that really, really, really well. Daniela, you're...
Yeah, I guess the next question that we kind of wanted to address is we wanted to look at how artists are responding to these times, either yourselves or other artists that you have that are within your community or that you have seen or follow. And anyone that would like to answer that question, you can unmute yourselves.
I could go. So these times are very interesting because on one hand, a lot of things are happening politically throughout the world, and just things that should have been handled are boiling to the surface, while also being in a global pandemic. And for me, I was struggling a lot in the beginning of a lot of protests, feeling like, okay, I want to do something, but I shouldn't go outside. Like, we're still all dealing with COVID. And that's when like my creativity, because I was like, I'm not gonna not do anything, just like 1 on 1,000. And my sense of purpose and responsibility just like increased. And I was like, I need to do work. I need to get work done. Like Reba and I met up and we're like, sweet season, gotta go hard. So like a lot of the programming we had was catered to like difficult conversations, not only honing in on like one thing that's happening in the world that's like big, which is racism and white supremacy, but also honing in on the weak points of our social systems, like all of them, and what's toxic and what's bittersweet and what's difficult. So just through our social practice, like I just responded just online, digital, like, yo, because I feel like if a lot of these sicknesses or social illnesses are housed in the psyche, because these operate like mental illnesses, art hits you in your psyche. So I was like, so that's going to be the anti-venom that we're going to put out there. So it forced me and Riva to really go in with the content we're doing digitally, because whoever's not outside is on Instagram. So we're like, okay, we're going to do that. And on my fine art practice, it forced me to really tap into like the environments I wanted to be in and like the spiritual space I wanted to be in. So a lot of my paintings are placed outdoors, because Walter's talking about architecture, and I'm talking about how like architecture can also limit your mental spiritual space and how you think. So a lot of my paintings are outdoors. So I just went in for my solo show and I was like, okay, like my settings are outside from different perspectives, and the angles of the compositions are different, and the animals I introduce in my work are like free animals, like birds who can fly and could just go and like see things from different perspectives. And So like, that's how my fine art practice kind of reacts to times. And finally, just being an artist in resident at the Zeal studio has helped me really hone in on like cooperative economics and cooperative forms of management and group management, and learning, oh, artists can really help each other. Like, we don't have to wait for these institutions, which are crumbling right now, to solve those issues for us. Because if we do, I'm so grateful for all the institutions that are putting out grants and resources, but that's not completely sustainable for the longevity of what we all need. So just being part of Zeal really helped me be like, okay, if these institutions fail us, which they're not designed to completely take care of us for anything that happens. A lot of things, yes, but a lot of things, no. We need to be like the second line of defense. That's even stronger. So it helped me realize like there are a lot of artists getting together right now, and a lot of artist collectives responding to the times in a way that like helps us be sustainable in our practice and our spirit and our bodies, and be healthy and still go in and do what we need to do to change the world. This is like a long question response, but yeah, that's kind of how I've been responding.
Devin, did you have something you wanted to add to that? You're muted, you're muted.
About that. I think as far as what Eileen was talking about, how there are systems now that are designed or were designed to help us, but we're understanding that they're not so helpful all the time. And so we're seeing a lot of artists now pull together some of their own money between a group of themselves or other creative professionals and peers. And I'm seeing now artists brand grants where it's in service for other artists. And so I'm starting to see there are certain initiatives being made because of the addressing, or the I guess the lack of structure that really helps us, you know, like made by us for us type of situation. I'm starting to see that type of model happen, and I think that FUBU mentality is what we kind of need, you know, if we're understanding that this art community is a community. You know, we act like it is in other ways than it is the social gathering through art openings or after parties or things like that. It's actually holding space again to have these conversations amongst your friends and family about what you think are plaguing the system that you're in, and how can we actually be those bodies of change. And so it starts with the dialogues of what are the things that need to be filled up, and we see where we can put the chips where they lie.
Definitely, which is a great segue. I'm curious what has shifted for you mentally, emotionally, or spiritually during this time, and how you've integrated those shifts into your daily practice. So in short, what are you activating and what are you deactivating? And how has that maybe surprised you?
So I'm gonna go again because I think I had this perspective, this privilege of seeing the Western world from a different lens. I was in Dakar, Senegal for the past 4 months, where I arrived March 1st, right when the news outlets and social media are talking about the dangers of COVID. So literally my flight was the last week before we are in this new normal. And so I got the chance to, for one, see the beauty of Dakar, Senegal, but also I was sit in between this conflict of my Western privilege to how we are operating in the Western world to how it is in a different country, a developing country. And I felt conflicted because I'm here, I was there in a very beautiful place where some of those ways in which Black people and Black and brown people have been treated in America, those things aren't necessarily tethered to my mind anymore, my subconscious. You know, I'm amongst people that look like me. I'm amongst people who have the same rights and wants for rights and things like that. And so I don't know, I felt like really torn watching all of this happen, being overseas. But it also helped me understand that there's so much more for me to even do And so I'm willing to take on whatever that means.
Fafila, I'd love to hear your thoughts on this one.
I feel like Walter was about to say something. Were you? Could you repeat the question one more time? Just about daily shifts. Oh, you're muted.
Practice what you preach, right? What has shifted for you mentally, emotionally, or spiritually during this time? How have you integrated these shifts into your creative practice? In other words, what are you activating or deactivating?
Yeah, deep question. Well, I feel like something that has been really like affirming for me about this time is just that I'm kind of someone who has been thinking about the apocalypse for the last probably since 2014 in very serious ways, like we need to train our body kind of ways. And there was a sense of again, I'm just gonna speak from my subjectivity because it's always really kind of loaded because it's such a hard time economically. It's such a hard time like in so many ways for so many people, but I don't necessarily feel like maybe there's an exacerbation for sure, but in many ways what we're seeing is like an accentuation of things that were already not working. So it's not like, oh my God, for the first time ever, like we're having problems with whatever. It's kind of like these things that already weren't working are just being exacerbated. And so with that being said, I feel like for me, I felt a huge sense of relief, just that everybody seemed to be on the same page, thinking about the same questions, because there were moments where I felt, just varying degrees of isolation of just like, everybody else seems to be fine. Why am I always kind of stressing about this so deep? So there was that moment that happened where I'm like, okay, like collectively, we're all being asked to pause, and to Eileen's point, like just being asked to look at what points and in what ways has there been an internalization of all of these systems. And so just had a lot of appreciation for that. And then what I mentioned about time was really deep for me, just like understanding how much I ascribe to the value system of rest, but I don't actually have a very deep embodied practice of rest. I think that it's like a continuously evolving, like just deeper layers of just the internalization of value systems of capitalism and productivity. And so really just been like taking the opportunity to connect with like geological time, deep time, and what that really looks like and what that really means. And so with that, I felt like a really strong call to re-examine our urgency. And I'd say that in a way that's like both, I think I have to say with that, I exclude like direct political action from that framework. But I think outside of direct political action, there's a deep internalization that like, we need this yesterday, which is very true. But I think just what does that do for the ways in which, one, I think we can internalize a lot of like white saviordom in ways that we're not really fully aware of. I think we can internalize a lot of like guilt in ways that we're not fully aware of, and what it means to be moving from those spaces and creating from those spaces and trying to quote unquote help from those spaces, to me is actually like, I felt the need to call that in my own life, and to just be like, how can we have a different starting point? And I feel like prayer for me has just reignited as like a true way of just asking for direction, asking for guidance, and moving with humility, and moving with like knowing that there's so much we can't even know. Like how do we take the overwhelm as actually part of the humility with which we have to move. Yeah, I'll stop there.
Walter, did you also want to add anything? You're muted, so.
Yeah, I guess in the beginning of this pandemic, was really just taking sacred pause. I think I was moving so fast that it was like Mother Nature's trying to tell us something to slow down for a minute so we could regroup and then move forward again. And even just like thinking about my twin brother Cleaver, just this idea of choosing joy deeply as a form of resistance, of like, shit has been going wrong, right? Like Adil just said, it's not new. So it's also important that we practice having those moments of joy, of like, we're gonna have to keep fighting, but we also have to, we can hold both. We don't have to pick one. And also thinking a lot during this time, shifting around, which work I was already doing with like Baji and different organizations, but thinking about how are we decentering Blackness as an experience in the US and embracing global solidarity with Black people. Because these things are happening all over, right? Like I've been using art to speak about the Black immigrants from the continent who are being detained by ICE that doesn't get spoken about. Speaking about the massacres that are happening to Black Brazilians, you know, folks are getting killed by the systems all over the world. So how are we using this privilege of being in this country, on this soil, to talk about those people as well, so that they don't get buried in the dust? So focusing a lot on that, of like, we're all going through it together, so how are we connecting those dots, not just across this country, but across countries in general, throughout the diaspora. And that there's joy in that, and you can find that solidarity with people around the world that look like you. And you can learn from each other, because the way shit is going on in Brazil, they're moving different than here, the same way they're moving different in Senegal. So we all got things to learn from each other that we can lean on each other for. So thinking a lot and focusing a lot on global solidarity through my art practice.
Can I jump in? My whole like, oh
I know,
God.
I peeped you with Theo and I was like, keep going.
Just before you jump in, like, we're gonna open up to community shortly, so prepare yourselves to be raising your hands, y'all.
Just on the question of like global Black solidarity and just like how beautiful that invitation is to like, you know, unpack and begin to like really think beyond American exceptionalism, because I feel like it's so nuanced and it's so complicated, and there's like rarely places where we can really go in, you know, and kind of like really tease out some of what the specifics of all this are. Because I talked about this on a like really long Instagram live that I did with a friend, kind of impromptu, because we were both like processing and just needed a space. When the protests first started happening all around the country, like just so many emotions about so many things. But to just keep it focused, I personally, as someone who is originally Sudanese, living in this country right now, Sudan just went through a huge revolution for like the entirety of last year, just feeling like so close, just temporally and energetically, to both of these situations happening like back to back essentially, and just feeling like there's so much about just to keep it local, like in America, the experience of like Blackness that I have so much access to, you know, for a lot of reasons. I'm like a dark-skinned Black woman, like there's so much. And then there's so much else that's really different for me, being someone who's Sudanese living in America versus someone who's African American. And just knowing like what does it mean to have, it's a completely different ontological organization of reality.
Yeah.
Like fundamentally super different. And so to know that, and to be like, there's a lot I can't speak on or can't comment on, and that there is like, you know, just like to take a pause and like just be with that real difference, and not want to like rush to, but we're all so connected as like a way to, you know what I mean? So that was one thing. But then I realized I was totally falling into American exceptionalism in a certain way, because I have a friend, her name is Zoe Samundi. She's an amazing writer and like posts a lot on Instagram if anybody wants to follow her. But she had this panel, and the kind of topic of global Black solidarity came up, and just contending with the framework of the nation state, and with violence as like a very key framework that perpetuates the nation state, and how the global order of power is so linked, both historically and in its current kind of ramifications, and just what we can do, like in reading certain authors and revisiting certain material, and in like really doing that work of both unpacking and making those connections from like not a Black Panther place, but also not a, I guess, whatever, not Wakanda, you know, but also not like, you know, not too much like there's so much specificity, because as much as that's true and important to account for, I think like what is like global revolution, what does global Black revolution look like, and how can we get there if we don't actually sit and tease out like some of these really strained, hard to talk about histories. So I love that you brought that up, and would love to keep talking with anybody who wants to.
Well, we are opening the floor to the community dialogue. So please, if you have a question or anything you want to say, just raise your hand and we will unmute you.
Y'all shy?
There's a question in the Q&A. Oh,
Okay.
they don't want to speak out loud.
Right, okay. Basically the way this is gonna work is we're gonna be able to hear your voice, but if you feel really passionately about also being seen, let me know and I'll temporarily add you as a panelist. Hey, Javin, can you unmute yourself?
Yeah.
Am I unmuted?
Yep, we can.
Yes.
How you doing? This is Javin. I'm friends with Riva and Itzel. Good to see your faces. Glad to see the smiles. Thank you for having me. So something that you guys made me think about that I've been working with a lot recently.
Javin, you're cutting off a little bit.
Current moment is trying to figure out the lines between. Try to make it quick. How have you guys been working through trying to figure out which opinions and perspectives on the world are truly your own, and then perspectives that have been, I'm not going to say forced upon you, but taught to you or highly influenced upon you by media or other perspectives that you almost take for your own? Because I find myself in this moment conflicted at times. I'm not sure where I draw my lines with speaking out, if I am someone who has a platform or who is even qualified enough to share an opinion about such topics. And I want to know from your guys' perspectives, because I would consider myself somewhat an artist. Where do you draw your lines as far as what it is that you feel comfortable sharing in your work, or even uncomfortable but necessary to bring to light?
Wow, this question.
No, it's a good one.
That is really good. You go, Devin.
Yeah, I think, Javin, I learned a lot about opinions when I was in my MFA program at Pratt Institute. And, you know, at MFA programs, they always prepare artists to talk and speak, and to know about your intentions, to know about what you're doing with every move and everything about your work. And so it involves a lot of talking, and often a lot of times repeating yourself. But then, so when you start repeating yourself when you're speaking to a group of your classmates and your professors, you start to develop your own philosophy. The things that stick, the things that keep on being pointed on, are the things that are your belief system. And of course, opinions can either come into the way of, you know, criticality, I guess, of, you know, that's always being questioned. But I feel like one thing that helped me was to take an opinion, you know, we go through one ear and they can interrupt it through the other ear. It can enter your ear with a large chunk and then come out with like a few specks of salt on the other end. So it's either about what do you want to sit with, what do you think is rattling enough to help you think internally to reconfigure how you sit with whatever questions being posed, or if this is already a part of my personal philosophy. If it's not, then this opinion is not for me. And if it is, I'll consider it for another time. And that's just personally one of the things and one of the tactics I learned and I picked up at MFA. But going on to the social aspect of the global opinions, there's such thing as group speak. There's such thing as not group speak, but group think. And you know, we're all part of this collective group, this thing that is the Instagram, social media. We're all linked in through this AI, this portal. And we're getting fed a lot of opinions, a lot of thoughts that may not be ours, but also probably make sense to us in some way. And then it also goes in with like how factual are these things. So it's really about hearing the thing, making the research and an alignment to self. And if those things don't align to self, then maybe this is not for me, or maybe this is carved out for someone else. Yeah.
Oh, go ahead. I'll go wait. Go ahead.
Yeah. Sorry. Avila's listening to the Zoom, so I'm telling him to turn it off because I'm here. So the whole notion of like figuring out what's yours, what are some of the things that you should align yourself with versus some things that have been just like forced upon you is something that I've been really thinking about recently. Over the last like 8 months, I think like at the end of last year, I started like really entering like a energetic space of like trying to figure out what's real, like what's truth, what's reality, not automatically agreeing with groups of people that I've historically or on my everyday or socially have always attached myself to for the sake of just being in solidarity. Because I feel like there's no growth if you're just always agreeing. And I've kind of come up with structures that have made me like really be curious about the things that I'm intaking. And definitely like doing Honey and Smoke with Reba has like given me a platform to explore new ideas, because we have seasons that change every time and we're always like kind of playing devil's advocates and asking a lot of questions from the perspective of someone who may not know the topics that we're asking people to engage with. So definitely I've been just like in a very Aquarius moon type of way where I've just been asking a bunch of questions, haven't denied conversations with people who are like I have a friend who's a cop and like that's hard, but we have those conversations, you know? Yeah, so I've just been really curious, and through that neutral curiosity is allowing me to be more compassionate. And it's allowing me to be more compassionate with people who have different opinions than my own, and also be compassionate with myself when I'm undoing certain thought patterns that I've had in the past. So just definitely remaining curious. And that actually helps my creativity, because now I'm like, oh, I want to explore this. I want to explore that. Like, what does it mean to like think about these topics? Oh, this is a taboo. Let me think about it. And when I think about my art practice, and like something that you said, Javin, about choosing to put certain things in your work, for our social practice and Honey and Smoke, sometimes it's difficult to talk about certain topics, but we power through because they're expressed more in a like social practice, digital content, educational kind of way. So they kind of have like a neutral platform. But for my fine arts practice, that's like, it depends, because a lot of my work has a lot of like spiritual symbology that in a lot of things in like my tradition are sacred and are secretive. So you're not supposed to like paint them or like showcase them. So that's when like I have to like honor those who came before me, who like are in this practice, because some of the things we paint or create come from culture, and some things are very private. Like some artists will show, I think about like some artists will showcase scenes from like the civil rights movement, or like people who have been shot or killed by the police, without thinking of what does that look like socially? What does it feel like for the person's family who's watching you make work about this? Like, it's something that's already talked about. Like, can you do your due diligence and reach out to the person that you're trying to paint? Like, for example, if I'm want to put some Ifa symbology in my work, I have to talk to my Babalao. I can't just like include like Yoruba symbols in my work that are meant to not be seen. Or if I want to include George Floyd in my work, like I feel like I should reach out to his family and be like, how would you feel about me doing this? Because I feel like as artists, we have responsibility, and everything that we create, it's like a word we're saying, it's language. Not everybody's going to receive what you're saying, right? Some people might get offended. It's a communication method. So definitely be in conversation with, remain curious and be in conversation with your sources if you can.
Yeah, to me, two things come to mind. One of them is like, if we understand that this global white supremacist project has been going on for quite some time, then we can also understand that its resistance is an iterative process. So I always look backwards of like, what have people gone through that I can learn from, right? So I'm always reading about whether it's like things happening in this country, or reading about the Bolivian women miners who were resisted together and organized together to create change in Bolivia in the 70s. These are all different things that I try to pull from to understand like, what have people been doing? It's a fallacy to think that we have to start from scratch now. It's something we've been building off of. I think we get caught up in that because people start thinking like, what's the big thing that I can do versus what can I add to what's already been happening? So I'm always looking back. And I'm even thinking about this book I read right before the pandemic hit called The Spirit of Intimacy by Subham Fusome. And she talks a lot about like how, when we know that things aren't happening the way they should be happening and the way that we know they could be happening, it's also our job to step out the way and let ancestors step in, right? This majestic pool of folks who are around us, these spirits, are also here to help and guide us. So sometimes our ego gets in the way that we need to be the ones to be there to make things change. When in reality, there's already things working to help us make that change. So also stepping out of my own way a lot, as much as I can, and just letting the shit channel through me and see what happens.
Beautiful. So I want to hear at least one more voice in this round. Mercy, your hand was up first. Mercy, can you unmute yourself?
Hi.
Hi.
How is everyone? Thank you for this time and all of the different energies and dialogues that you all have been contributing thus far. I wanted to go back to a conversation that Athil had brought up, and this is, for everyone to answer, but especially for those of us who were born in the States but have a non-Western or like an other-centric framework for how we approach things. I find, at least for myself in my praxis, that sometimes it is easier to just like go back and kind of like take things from where my parents are from or where my ancestors are from. But because I was born in the States, I don't necessarily have like 1000% claim to that because I did not grow up in that context. And so in thinking about what it looks like to not have like more of like an American centric, Western centric framework, what have been like your own unique expressions of the calling back or the Sankofa within your praxis that is not a complete extraction, right? Because sometimes like I did grow up in the States, like I can't, deny the fact that like I grew up in a context that is different from where my parents grew up in. And at the same time, I also have a birthright to those things. So I'm just curious to know like what have been kind of like, maybe not the negotiations, but definitely the integrations of both of those things in a way that is not, centering, the context that you grew up in, if any of that makes sense. And I can clarify if needed.
I think I was born in the United States, but my family's from the Dominican Republic. And I grew up until I was 11 in the Dominican Republic and then New York City. And for me, I think that negotiation happens a lot with like understanding American privilege when traveling to other places, and just how I position myself in the world. And for me, that's happened a lot with just like American privilege, socioeconomic status, and how my race is perceived when I travel. So, and that's something that I've had to think about, because I'm very like proud to be Black. But then when I go to other countries, like when I'm in Brazil, sometimes I'm not considered fully Black, or like, I've never been to South Africa, but like I'm told that I wouldn't even be considered Black in South Africa. I'd be like colored, which is what they call like mixed people there. And it's something that I've had to like understand when thinking about myself in the world, the difference between what you read as and what you actually grew up with, and what you look like, and how like when you step into the world, that says a lot about the things that are going to happen to you and who you're going to deal with. So that's something that I've had to do. And I think it's been hard for me sometimes with my family to honor like my Dominican identity, when a lot of times Dominicans don't want to say they're Black, or go off solely what they look like and deny their ancestors if they're not looking fully Black. So I've had to really negotiate understanding that not everybody that I interact with is going to come from the same place of like knowledge of self and knowledge of community. And I've also had to find the best place that I feel comfortable in like myself. Because I feel like I've had to like have a marriage between this is where I come from and this is how the world perceives me. And if I deny one or the other, like I'm not complete. Like I just need to understand, like when I'm in this lands, different lands, or when I'm thinking about different ancestors, or when I'm thinking about different perceptions of my body, I have to like look at it very holistically. I can't just say this is who I am and this is what I feel like and that's what y'all gonna be dealing with. Because that's how you remain privileged in a way, whether or not you realize it. So
Thank you for that.
So do one more of you want to respond before we take our commercial break?
Love to respond to that. Thank you so much for that question. Could you say their name again?
Mercy, or Miehedit. I hope I said your name right. I'm sorry.
Okay. That was such a deep question that I think about a lot. And I think like the key word and the question being extractive, you know, like how do you have a relationship to belonging or not belonging to wherever that is not extractive, especially in the context of art making. You know, I feel like I just saw this meme, but there's so many different variations of it, of just like rappers calling their grandma, like, say something deep for my interlude, you know? And I just think it's really funny, like just what are our like, you know, relationships to home and how we use it in work and like all the different imaginations of home. But I feel like I want to mention a couple of things. One is that there's a really amazing episode of the podcast, How to Survive the End of the World, that I came upon at some point in quarantine, and it's an interview by this duo who have a project named Queer Nature, and they talk about kind of survival and how I mean, I won't really summarize it. It's really beautiful and complex. But the one thing I want to say is that they were talking about this element of them that comes up in survival training, like really like in the woods, you know, we're out here, and this speaking of like internalization, just what they call it, their inner colonizer, and like have a name for that energy, you know, like it's Susie or whoever, you know, coming up right now being like, how am I treating the land? How am I treating the environment? How am I moving in a way that centers my survival, but it's actually really extractive to other things? And just understanding that, again, it's less, I'm personally so much less interested in dichotomies or in us versus them or whatever, but just like the ways in which all of this is internalized, right? So with that, like I have so much I could sit and talk to you about all the ways in which, looking back, I'm like, yeah, that was fucked up, you know, in terms of how, but honestly, as I say that, I don't even think it was fucked up. I think it's like, I have so much like compassion for my younger self, being like, wow, like you really were on a search, you know, for like belonging and for what this specific energetic signature of like why you are incarnated in these particular lineages in this moment and why you are living in whatever land you are living on, like what are the intersection of all these things. Like it's so deep, you know, and it has so much. And for me, I think something that really opened things up for me, and I coincidentally was just talking about this with my friend Amelia a couple of days ago, and it was the first time that I had articulated this, where two key, like really deep moments for me in my life. One of them was, like I said, I'm from Sudan, and whenever I went back, I always was in the capital. I was in Khartoum, and something happened when I like left and started going up to the north where I'm from. And for me, it was about the relationship with the land. Like it had nothing to do with any human being. There was like just this deep energetic click that happened. And then yeah, that was really key. And then something around, I love what everybody is mentioning, especially like, yeah, Walter, what you were saying about just the ancestors, you know, like once I had started to develop direct contact and relationship with my ancestors, there was this thing that happened that almost completely bypassed even my immediate family, even like everybody who's alive and everybody who's been alive in the last 2 generations, where I'm just like, I actually disagree with a lot of Sudanese culture. I disagree with the way that we think about things or the way that we treat certain people or all of that. But it's like, oh, it's not about that. There's also a process of a whole epistemological way of learning and being that bypasses like what is, you know what I mean? And for me, I think like it kind of ties into the last question just about discernment. That's kind of the bottom line to me, is like, how do you develop that practice of like discernment of like what, because you'll know certain things will sit with you differently. And you know when your inner colonizer is at play, you know, and you know when you're preaching about something you don't really know about, or when it's like none of these have clear lines, but it's all about that practice of checking in consistently and like getting that read, because you know, a part of you knows.
It keeps coming, we keep coming back to these questions of accountability and holding yourself accountable and making sure that your ego is not taking over, which are all, we're going to get a lot deeper into that in the second half. So I'm glad that we're all kind of like revolving around the same questions. That's really exciting to me. I also want to remind everyone that when we come to the community dialogue section, it doesn't have to just be questions. These questions are also for you, and we want to hear what you have to think about them. So feel free to like keep sending your thoughts in the chat, or just like taking notes in the worksheet that we sent, which I'll resend right now. And these Zoom things can be really long, so we're taking a little commercial break where we're going to show some work from some of our panelists. So feel free to go get tea or go to the restroom or just think, reflect on how you're feeling. And I'm going to share this with you.
Our deepest fear is not that we are inadequate. Our deepest fear is that we are powerful beyond measure. It is our light, not our darkness, that most frightens us. Your playing small does not serve the world. There is nothing enlightened about shrinking.
And you spend a lot of time going around trying to convince other people or trying to get their approval. What will happen is that you will lose your nerve. And other people will convince you that what you're doing doesn't have any value. And you'll give up on your dream. You can sit up there and say, you know what I'm talking about, man. He's fighting people. You know we've been fighting 400 and still fighting to this day. To this day. To this day.
We're going to find those enemies. I'm going to get that enemy until I realize that until you conquer the enemy in yourself, you can't deal with anyone. In order to be used by God, you have to really be used. You know, we always want to be used for the glorious jobs. Let God put me on the stage.
Me, cause I'm close to the edge. I'm trying not to lose my head. It's like a jungle sometimes. It makes me wonder how I keep from going under. It's like a jungle.
Money just finds its way to you.
It does.
No,
I have a relationship
money.
with money. No, I just think money recognizes me. Money is comfortable around me. Money likes me. So money feels when it needs someone to talk to, it'll choose me in the crowd and it'll come and sit next to me, whether it comes in a form of whatever, but it will choose.
2, 3, 4. There's too many of you. 7 billion residents of the earth. And we all go through issues in life. It's like if you're not really ready, then you can end up in pieces. Your peace of mind turns to sediment, settle into a verse. Pursuit of happiness has its perks. I'm circulating these verbs, bringing that relevance. I never take.
Seeds, I'ma just talk that cool breeze. I'ma just put that new seeds. I'ma be natural. I'ma just use my 2 feet. I'ma just make some money. I'ma just fly across seas. Then I'm gonna kiss the flow. Born in the chain, I see it in my name. Chased by the thoughts that shoot off in my brain. Should I break out the walls? Open the door. Open that boots up your mind. Hole in your soul. You shit on a boat. You soaked in your store. You dry to your Lord is the Lord. Your faith I explore. Closed eyes better recognize 10 times out 10. I'ma ride these footsteps in the moonlight. These old tools for a new fight. We breaking out like I'm a stylized Zoom beat on the west side. There's native tongues and foreign rides. Break beats and closed eyes better recognize 10 times out 10. I'ma ride this flow ain't been nullified. This game ain't been televised. Accelerate and memorize. Ephemeral identified. The color of the genocide. One nation ill-advised. I'ma just grow like blue seeds. I'ma just talk that cool breeze. I'ma just grow like new seeds. I'ma be natural. I'ma just use my 2 feet. I'ma just make some money. I'ma just fly across seas. Then I'm gonna kiss the flow.
Hi everyone, welcome back. Hope you're still here with us. Still waiting on a few. So I hope you've got to check out the worksheet. It allows you to answer some of these questions to yourself if you don't feel comfortable sharing out loud. We're going to move into our second segment. Daniela, if you want to start us off.
Yes. So as we mentioned, the first part was about just reflecting on this current moment. And as a community, we should come together and try to visualize a better future, or just visualize a different way of doing things. So the second part will be mostly focused on that. imagining new solutions and just thinking of new ways of how we can build a better world for everyone and for the art community. So the first question that we want to address is, what are the things that don't serve us in our industries and communities anymore, and what should we get rid of in a way?
Yes, thank you for that question. I think, let's see, one of the things I feel that is increasingly becoming a topic in the arts community is this secondary market, and how a lot of the time Black and brown artists are the ones who are at the helm of making people's secondary markets dreams come true, and doesn't necessarily benefit the artists. And so there are some things that I've been taking observation to where, because of Black and brown art being where it's at as far as a level of demand, it's a kind of a scary place to know that that work can be bought within maybe 2 or maybe less than 5 years, and it's gone on the auction block in the secondary market. There was really no life for that work to really sit with culture, for it to really mature. It is gone before it's right as it's made. And you know, one of the things that kind of troubles me is that, you know, you have this auction block, you know, and we know what that is, and we know what that feels like in the terms of our history being here in America. And, you know, we go through art as a level for our self-expression and maybe our freedom as well. But then when that freedom and that self-expression is then sold as a product and then put on a pedestal as a product, it becomes an issue to where we know that these artists aren't benefiting. There's no commission. These artists are going to be, as far as in a United States context. I know in the UK, they, when an artist's work goes on secondary market, they're allotted a percentage, so they're able to get some type of payoff from that. But that's not necessarily the case in America or the US. And so that's something I'm hoping and I wish will change, and it's becoming a greater issue in this time. Secondary markets and how Black artists specifically are making the curves, are making these trends, and making these records, but they're not seeing the full benefits. And sometimes it's actually hurtful to the artist's career if it is very, very young and just starting off. So I wonder how we can watch that slow down. How can we really regulate something like that?
Eileen, I know that you have written a bit about.
I can't hear you, Reva.
Can no one hear me?
You're just really low.
Hello now.
It might be your volume settings. It might have to.
Yeah.
Back up.
Well. Y'all can go ahead. I'm gonna figure this out.
Oh, are you asking me something? Were you gonna ask me something?
I was gonna ask you to talk about who owns Black art.
Oh yeah. So Walter and I can tag team on this. So in December, Walter and I and other members of the Zeal co-op, we put on the show called Who Owns Black Art during Miami Art Basel. And the show had to do, and its programming, because we had panels and workshops, focused on who are the true owners of Black artists' cultural production. And in the arts world, not just like fine art, but also in music, the film industries, throughout a lot of industries, there aren't avenues for Black artists to be the main like beneficiaries of their means of production beyond just like the initial sale of something, and then that lives on the way it does. And you see that a lot in the music industry in the past where like people weren't owning their masters, for example. So now we're in a place where there's room for this, like, I guess, independent route to be taken for artists to thrive with the internet and Instagram, because a lot of artists are being discovered on Instagram these days. But something that I've been thinking about has been longevity, you know, because things like Instagram sometimes operate under this trendy, just energetic field. And Black artists aren't trends, like we've been here. So I wish that there's more structures, and it's something that we're working on in Zeal, but that there are more structures to have Black artists to thrive, to be sustainable, to own the means of their production, to have their values always lead in what they're doing and still be happy and successful. And yeah, so I've been thinking a lot about that. And one of the main things I kind of want to see change in the art industry has been that the main pipeline for success has been academia. And that's something that I've definitely noticed, like, especially if you're a fine artist, like the top people, MFA, like it's like every new up and coming people, MFA. And I'm an academic person, so I love academia, like the concept of academia, not how it's done, because there's problems in these structures. However, I don't feel comfortable feeling like that's the only way or like the highest rate for success for a lot of these artists. And that comes from, like, you could even look at it like when you look at the Renaissance, the Italian Renaissance, how like Michelangelo, Da Vinci, all these people, they were patroned, and also like these academies came about. Even when you look at Picasso and Diego Rivera and all these artists, they all came through academies, like a form of academic place that like helped, incubated their practice, gave them mentorships, gave them connections to like these art spaces that were going to show their work. And as a Black artist, I just ancestrally feel a way about that being the main way, because in the United States, like Black people couldn't go to college up until like how many years ago? So I feel like I wish there were ways in our industry for Black artists to thrive and have like just all these like different pipelines for success that aren't centered around the academic space, because even that is an investment and it's like a toss of the coin sometimes, depending on how much you work, etc. And yeah, I just like feel a way about academic places being the main gatekeepers. They could exist, but we need more. And they need to restructure the way their pedagogy is, because a lot of artists like myself will be in schools like this and not even learn about the history of your people and the art that was made.
And just to add on to that line of thinking and complexify the question a little bit, we've all achieved some level of success in our careers, right? Like maybe we're not necessarily where we want to be, or it's a constant evolution, but we've all done that. We've all achieved some level. And so I'm curious, what are some of the ways that you've had to play into structures within the art world in order to achieve financial security or to achieve success? And I'm curious if this time has allowed you reflection on some of those choices, and maybe can provide an access point to breaking down these systems. You know, like starting with education is a great example, Eileen, but what are some of the other ways that you've maybe had to play into these systems? And then building off of that, how do you see yourself evolving out of that need? And how can you more actively choose your values over an idea of what you thought success needed to look like?
I would say this one hits a little bit personally to me, because I felt that an MFA was that thing as far as certificate wise. This is that shiny thing on a CV that people would take notice to. Specifically me being an African-American male looking the way that I do, there are certain things and certain tactics that I have to deploy in order for people to be comfortable with what I'm presenting to the table. And so as a master's or in my grad school program, you're in classroom, you're learning critical theory, you're sharpening your toolbox and your tool shed, you go into the studio, you do your hours in the studio, but then after that, you go out to the shows, the panels, the shows that a curator of interest is someone that you want to talk to. You go to that show, or an artist who you like, or the 5 artists that you like. You understand they have some solo shows or some group shows that are happening in the city, and you go to these shows. So it's not only about doing the work and prepping your mind for that work, but it's also being seen. If we are all on social media and we all are on this visual platform, I think that works in the way of familiarity and people wanting to work with you based off of familiarity, how they know you as a person. So I feel part of the work is also about part of who you know. And that's the thing that I really hated and I tried to challenge when I was a younger artist, is like that who you know thing. But I'm gonna be honest, I found that it's a really big part of this industry, or any industry, whether it is entertainment, whether it is politics, whether it is art. It's basing your connections on who you know, but also what you bring to the table is what brings you leverage. And so I think if you're always curious to find an answer, put yourself in the epicenter, put yourself in the place where the thing happens. If you're looking for answers, put yourself in the place where you can get those answers. Maybe asked by the people that you've always wanted to ask the question to. And so it's a lot of hard work on all scales. It is the questioning and trying to sharpen yourself, and also maybe playing to the fact that in society that you need to be seen. Some people may not always agree with that. I just know that it worked personally. For my case, that going out to places, specifically New York, you start to know people. And I mean, that's how I met Walter. You know, that's how I met a lot of people that I know in the city. It was going out to these places, going out to these events where more or less, if we have the same interests, you're gonna see that person 10 times throughout the year if we're all going to these art events. You're gonna continually meet and see these people to where they're actually now your acquaintances, your friends. And I just found that happen. You know, I met so many different people. Almost all the people that I know in New York have been through going out to exhibitions, going out, being in the city, going to other MFA programs, open studios, things of that nature. It's a community to build. And we got to find the people who you trust.
Walter, I'd love to hear what you have to say about this.
Yeah, I think early on when I first started taking my art practice more seriously, I was confusing subversion, right? I was thinking that if we can subverse in these different spaces that we enter, but as I've been living life and learning from different people, to me, I started associating that with reformism, and that's not something I'm aligned with, right? I want to abolish what's happening. And also, I'm always thinking about community, right? So any art space I've ever had and continue to have, I'm always thinking about community. I'm always thinking about, yes, I want to meet artists, but I also want to make sure that in my studio, the dudes from the hood that don't know anything about art or could care less can also come kick it too. And I can create possibilities for them too, right? I'm always thinking about, like, right now I'm in an MFA program and it's in Baltimore, one of the blackest cities in this country, right? So I'm also always thinking about how am I connecting with the folks in Baltimore, because the school that I'm at doesn't reflect the population that's in the city around that school, right? How am I making sure I'm creating space artistically, not just for artists in Baltimore, but the security guards that work at all the buildings, right? How am I connecting all of those people as well? Of like, I'm just constantly thinking about what is the impact that I'm trying to create through these art spaces, and who do I want to get to know? Not just who can I get to know, but like, how can I create those bridges between these different communities that I navigate? Of like, it actually doesn't need to be isolated. That's a fallacy that we need to, when I'm in this thing downtown, that means I can't also be, right? I like being someone who I can go hang out in the projects in the South Bronx and then that same night go hang out in the penthouse with somebody and bring those two people together and figure out what are those different connections that we can make. And just really trying to break down that idea of like, this hierarchy that doesn't work for us, that hasn't been working for us, right? Of like, how are we radically imagining what can it look like for Black artists and artists of color to break away from these capitalist ideas of what art and success look like, right? It's like, how are we creating these spaces for ourselves that are sustainable? And that, again, as I mentioned before, these aren't new concepts, right? There's people who've been trying these things and creating iterative processes around these things for quite some time. So it's also important that I'm looking around of like, who are these different collectives of Black artists historically that have been doing this work that we can build off of? It always comes down to community for me, of like, what is the impact versus the intent? Sure, I want to be a good artist. Sure, I want to do good things, but what is the impact that's actually happening? How am I creating possibility for folks who don't know that these things are possible?
And like connecting what Devin and Walter was saying, because there are still some rules we have to play. Like, 'cause not everything's, Rome didn't fall in a day, contrary to what people think. So I think that being from New York and living in Los Angeles, and even Devin, like being from LA, living in New York, or a lot of us who travel, there's a certain privilege that comes from being able to make the connections if you're in the right places. Because I'm from New York and LA, like I don't know the United States beyond the coast and like these two major cities that like set the tone for the country in a lot of ways culturally. So definitely something that like I feel like would work in our industries, it's kind of bridging the gap and helping someone who doesn't have certain resources. Like, for example, when I was in New York, it really helped me a lot to see Devin in the studio at Pratt. It was just amazing. Or like when I was in New York, it really helped me to see the artist Nate Lewis in his studio and Tariku. So just when people get to certain points, like definitely show people things that like they couldn't see, like introduce them to people that they would have not normally not been introduced to. And I think a lot about just privilege that I have through knowledge, like just growing up in the South Bronx and going to boarding school, which was like totally two different worlds. I've learned early on that class is not about money. Class is about access to people and resources. You elevate class dynamics. You could have $0 in your pocket, but if you're at a party with like the head of the gallery you want to be at, that like you're at another level energetically than the people you grew up with. Or, you know, like I've been in situations where I had like no money, but I'm out here in like London doing like a residency, like, you know, so, and seeing the world differently. So something that I definitely like that like Black artists do, because I also don't want to like feed into the whole crabs in a barrel thing, because not all of us do that. Like some do, so we're not gonna act like they don't, but it's kind of like a toss of the coin with that one. Is the fact that we're here to help each other and we're here to connect each other. And, you know, and I think a lot about how some people deny others opportunities when opportunities presented, and you think of an artist, but because you don't know them like that, you don't even bring their name up. And I think that's petty. And I think that there are ways that like we can share knowledge, continuously share knowledge with each other. Like, even if you don't think you're an expert in what you're gonna share, like just show someone something. Their curiosity and their brain is gonna process it differently. Let them do the thinking for themselves. So definitely bringing people into spaces where they are allotted like freedom to explore, be curious, network, see things that they would have never seen. You could literally open someone's world up by just putting them in a room or inviting them somewhere that they normally wouldn't have been. Because I've been blessed to have a lot of people on this panel do the same for me, so.
So we'd love to open it up again to the community to join into this conversation. And just as we're kind of wrapping up our thoughts, there's been a lot of really complex ideas and interrogations. So I'm curious to hear from both the panelists and the community, what do you feel like you need right now to be supported in this process? As we continue to try to centralize community further, and to divest from these very rigid ideas of what success looks like, how can we move forward as a community, even if that's just the people who are participating in this call? What are some of, and that the answer to that question can come from tiny acts, right? Like reflect on things that have worked for you during this time. Even if it's like, oh, my friend texts me to remind me to drink water. They can be small acts. But what I'm wondering is what's been working for you and how can we bring that into the space so that we're not feeling so overwhelmed by all of these huge issues that we're facing, and how can we create community around that so that we can start to shift these structures. So if any of the panelists want to appeal, I'd love to hear from you in the meantime as people start raising their hands. Or anyone who feels called to speak from the panel.
I'm just reading Zeal Press's comment in the chat.
Do you mind reading it out loud?
Also, I think about when art is sold in the secondary market for the owner, how the art then serves as a tax haven for them, so the accumulation of works then becomes of a maintenance of accumulation of wealth, which is inherently tied to capitalism. If an artist, especially a Black artist, is selling their work that is appreciating in value and goes onto the auction block, as Devin mentioned, it is tied to a legacy of slavery and how we account for our labor. It is just that slave labor is now wage labor that is appropriated and exploited. It's still rooted in the legacy of slavery. This is why Eileen and Walter's points are important around networking and collaboration. It is a part of transitioning away from these economic behaviors that capitalism creates.
Absolutely.
Yeah, it's just like, honestly, as much as like, you know, as you were saying, we have experience in certain areas as it relates to the art world, I still feel really perplexed by a lot of things in the art world, and I'm like constantly questioning it. And one thing that is like really crystallized for me is that like the art world, the fine art market is about it. The art world is really about trading objects in the market, in the fine art market. And just what is that like definition of what art is and what art isn't, that is like so different, right, from what we're talking about self-expression or about healing or about any of those things, then becomes commodified in a certain way. And that it feels to me like it's not super black and white. Like there's so many people across that spectrum that I feel like I sit in meetings with, like, you know, collectors or just people who run institutions who are very well off, who want to collect Black artists and are so like do not have the level of self-awareness to kind of deconstruct their not even this, like something way more basic of just why do they have an impulse to see Black suffering, like any question of 100 questions that could be asked. But just being like, wow, these, you know, just, yeah, I just think it's an interesting great gradation of intentions and actions and awareness. But that was not your question. Your question was about what we need. I'm really curious to talk to everyone, but you know, Walter and Eileen mentioned it just about collectivizing and like what worker-led spaces are like, and like what kinds of very real life, tangible, you know, just moments of friction arrive in the actual practice of that world making. Because I feel like I've been in a visioning of that, but yeah, would love to have those conversations. Yeah.
Do you want to answer that, Walter?
I mean, for starters, it's not easy, right? You're trying to you're reimagining what it can look like to sustain each other. So that also means you have to reimagine what it looks like to sustain each other. So it's like a constant of reevaluating and trying out and experimenting different ways to hold each other and learning that, right, if we're saying we're trying to break away from these capitalist ideas around art, that also means it shows up in these collective practices around like, value doesn't only come from monetary things, right? It's like, how are we spreading the wealth with knowledge? How are we spreading the wealth with the spaces that we have access to, with the resources we have access to, right? All of those things that have nothing to do with physical money. of like how are we creating networks with each other and within the people that we know, right? We often joke that we're thinking of Zeal in ways ultimately of becoming like a gym membership for Black artists. Of like you get to tap into this larger network of all these different spaces and access to all these different resources that can help one another. And that takes time, right? Because we're actively inside of the thing that's trying to keep us down. So as we're trying to get away from it, that means constantly trying to get away from it. That means that we're not looking to be funded solely by institutions or by funds, or like how are we creating these opportunities outside of those systems as well? Because we can't just say we want to be this co-op that does this thing for ourselves, but then we're still practicing the same ways that a 501c3 would practice, or the same way that a corporation would practice, right? It means that all the way around, we have to be radical about the way we're creating those systems for ourselves.
Yeah.
And that's not easy, but it's something that we're willing to do, and we're gonna keep doing. And that really the idea is, for me, as I think about Zeal, is how are we proving this idea as a model, right? It's not to say that when we get it to work fully, this is the answer. This is an answer. This is a tool that people can now use to sustain themselves, right? And we just want to keep adding to this larger toolbox for Black artists.
Yeah, like definitely something that if you're part of a co-op, any co-op, and I'm talking about Zeal in particular, you have to have a certain mindset that you're applying to every interaction that you have with the cooperative members, particularly around value and abundance. And that comes from doing a lot of inner work and realizing your value, because kind of like I was saying earlier, like if you have resources, share them, connect someone to somebody, like, you know, do this, etc. That's something that we practice a lot at Zeal, but in order to do that, you have to know you have value. Like you have to know I'm here because I know I have something in the history of my being that's going to help somebody who also is here. And also you have to understand that resources are going to come to you in ways that you would have never thought of. Like there have been people in Zeal who have put me onto things I didn't even think that person was going to have to connect to that. Like, you know, so just like allowing people to show you the value that they have. And the main thing that was really hard to do at first, because we have like in a lot of our cultures, this idea of like, don't take no handouts, is asking for help and like letting someone give you something. Like, and that's something that I've had to like, yo, any collaboration that somebody want to have with me, I already know, be like, this is what I need. Like, this is what I need. This is how you can support me. And then it makes me ask the person like, in what ways do you need support? And now when I ask that, my brain divides into so many like roads, and it's like, this person might need money. They might need a person, an editor, a digital designer, like a publicist, just to connect, just like a number that I'm gonna give them, and that's gonna be my job for the moment. So definitely being part of like a group, artist cooperative that self-manages each other has allowed me to understand support differently, to offer it differently, and also it's made me just be ready to like help. And it also brings me in a place that I'm like, if I'm out of line, I know I got like XYZ amount of people who are gonna come say something to me. And being in Zeal, I've like kind of made this like energetic covenant that it's like, if I get to a point in my life or my career where I'm steering away from the values that are important to me and other people, they all can drag me through the dirt and be like, yo, what are you doing? Because I've already entered that space of like shared energy that's consistent in the growth. And like, I don't view my practice as thriving because I singularly did all that on my own. It was always
I would add one thing of like, also as a co-op and a collective, we move from principle, right? So we move from principles of love, joy, grace, and abundance. And then we also practice communication because we actually don't have to guess what we need. We can just ask each other, right? We ask artists what they need, and that's how we've been able to figure out what to provide, right? It's that I think sometimes we can get caught up in like, we just want to do good for people without asking them first. So now there's intention again versus impact. So I think at Zeal, we also think a lot about like, Eileen, what do you need this week? You know what I'm saying? Like, how can we help? How can we support? versus like, I think Eileen might need this thing, and then I might do it, and then maybe that's not what she needed at all.
Yeah, we need.
So moving away from assumption-based decisions as well.
We have a hand raised, so I want to bring in some voices that have been waiting to talk. Isolde, I think.
Hi, yes, my name is Isolde, and I really appreciate what just has been said, because my experience is also that resources come in unexpected ways, and there is this assumption that the art market is going to take care of you. But they do take care of you if you bring in the collector and all those things and have the networks already set up. And it's possible to do that. But it's also possible right now to create new networks online, find different ways to support each other, and really come from this love, joy, grace, and abundance, and cultivate that. And I just wanted to just underline it. It's absolutely a great opportunity.
Mm.
Yeah. Sorry, go ahead.
Okay, just quick introduction. I love that. And both Walter and Aline, just what y'all offered in terms of, you know, I love the model and hearing from you about like a horizontal model of co-opt, because I feel like a lot of this stuff is just like how Black people have made it in general, like survived. So it's like very anti-individualism is very embedded within our being, but that's not to say that we don't still, our existence isn't mapped onto these systems of oppression. And so I feel like I'm just curious, as something that I'm constantly thinking about, especially in the art world, being in a collective that is mixed in gender. I'm not sure like who else is in it or just what that is like, but I think there's something about the stereotype or actually it's an archetype of like a genius male artist that really exists in popular culture, and there's a lot that can, it's easy to occupy that space. I wouldn't say easy, but it's available, you know, it's like there's reference points for it. And so just curious about how your modalities of supporting each other can come to whether there's any moments of friction just around patriarchy specifically, and how that operates both like in an internalized way as well as in the art market generally, and like models of success in that way.
Mm-hmm.
It's interesting because so Zeal right now, the principal members is 7 of us, 4 women, 3 men, and yeah, 3 men. I'm like, I don't remember how many of us are there, but we also have other artists that work with us that aren't principal members. They're just like joining the co-op and they're getting served in different ways. Like, for example, Devin's not officially a part of the co-op, but he used our studio last year to work on his solo show, for example. And the patriarchal structures, that's something that like I've been really blessed to have like all the men that have been part of Zeal and since I've joined to be very socially conscious, like extremely. And it also helps that a lot of us, like in the 7 members, we represent 3 regions of the United States, like the Midwest, the East, the West. 2 of us are Dominican, 1 is Ghanaian, another one is half African-American and like Nigerian, right? And then like we have people from like different parts of the United States. So just having that, I think it helped that when you're in group dynamics and like cooperative dynamics, to have your cooperative or group dynamics be reflective of the diversity of Blackness. Obviously we can't, Blackness is so grand that like we don't have every identity at Zeal yet because there are more people, but we're in conversation with people that are different than us. And I think that really helps us not perpetuate patriarchal structures or like some people getting more help than others or some people thriving. And I think if we ever get to that point, I like that we've developed a lot of structures to really check each other, like, because that's important. And like something that we do in a lot of our meetings is like we ground ourselves in like very peaceful ways. Like we don't start the meetings without grounding and then checking in personally. Like all our check-ins are personal check-ins. And then we get into the meeting. So that kind of helps alleviate these structures that we can't escape, as a lot of us are like unlearning a lot of things being in the co-op.
Yeah, and I would just add to lift up Alan Frimpong, the main founder of Zeal, is that for him, this was also a spiritual calling, right, that he answered. And that we're, as a collective, deeply rooted in that spiritual connection to these things and understanding that this thing we're trying to navigate, we're trying to get free on a lot of different levels, right? It's not just breaking away from capitalism. It's also how we get to be the artists we want to be at all times and not have to choose when we can show up, but just show up all the time. And I think that's, for me, that's what keeps me there as well, as being part of Zeal, is that we really committed to this shit about getting free. It's more than just art. It's bigger than art. It's how are we using art as a tool of communication for the things that we need to talk about. And that guides me a lot as I'm a part of this group.
Yeah, I hear the word nurture come up a few times, and as well as patriarchy. And I'm not trying to say that patriarchy can't be nurturing, but I think we learned that nurturing quality from our matriarchs, our mothers, our grandparents, our aunts, and our family. And so if we're able to take on the ways in which that selflessness helped us into our upbringing and our awareness, I'm interested in seeing that shift from this patriarchy into a maternal influence. You know, and I think that idea of reaching out and asking like, hey, are you hungry? Are you good with rent? Or do you need materials? Do you need some canvas? Do you need paint? Do you have a project? Let me lead you into this email link and thread. Like, so it could be a series of those small questions of checking in. Anything, I guess, like maybe your mother or someone who really cares about you would ask, to make sure that the fundamentals are met. But I think if we're thinking about how we can change old systems, we have to think about what are the old systems? What are the things that need to be changed? And what are some things that we haven't seen be done? A model that I like personally, and it's one of my favorite artists, is Theaster Gates, for his ability to have art as the main source of packing the information in the dialogue, but the resources that he's able to get from that exchange leads into the Dorchester projects and his acquiring of the bank and acquiring of other spaces that can then be turned public. So if we don't have like superstar art money like Theaster Gates, maybe it's becoming a thing where we pull a percentage from our income or work sold, 5%, 10%, like you would put aside for maybe savings. Or maybe it's even talking about financial literacy. Like when you first get your bit of coin, what do you do with it right off the gate rather than spend it? So like some ways in which that we should start talking about the questions that aren't talked about in school, like again, financial literacy. What do you do with your money when you have it? How do we open up a open source resource system with other artists that can help other artists in need or extending? So it's ways in which that there are structures that work or be known to work, but how can we tweak them and add on to them for them to really benefit us specifically? And so, I mean, there can be ways where, like with Theaster Gates, there's a Black Artist Retreat that he does a few times where it's just like a specific knit of people and we just talk and converse about topics, mesh, have creative juices flowing all in that span of just a retreat. And I think just for us to have that space when you're safe and to feel like, oh, I could just go out with my whole expression, whole being and not be judged, that's a safe space. And when you're feeling safe, a lot of joy and a lot of creative things can then be opened up with that being said. So, Zeal is one of those places that it's becoming a hub. So that's just one hub that we're knowing about in Los Angeles. Let's start striking up these or raising up these hubs nationwide where that same energy or the iteration is being being made. It's like a different way of a schooling or a different outlook to maybe like summer camp programming. You know, like I think that would be interesting to maybe brainstorm on how can we make programming that is geared to learning and also having that safe space that we speak about.
Thank you everyone for joining us today, and thank you to our wonderful panelists. And I think we have a lot of things to think about, and these conversations have brought up a lot of issues, but also wonderful thoughts about the future. And we want you to know that we are here. We're a community where we're here to listen to you. I'm going to share everyone's information in the chat if you want to be in touch with us afterwards. If you want to share your worksheet that you received with your answers or comments to the questions that are either on the worksheet or that we discussed during the forum, you can just take a picture of it and send it to honeysmokemedia@gmail.com. That's on the bottom of the worksheet for you. And yeah, and we just want to thank everyone for joining us. I know we went over time a little bit, but the conversations were so wonderful and fluid. So again, thank you. And let me add everyone's contact at the bottom and be in touch.
Thanks so much, you guys. Until next time.
Thank you.
Take care, everybody.
Thank you.